A turning point in Zimbabwe? The ruling party is put to the test in the first election without Robert Mugabe for 40 years. But the former president, who was overthrown last year, makes a surprise appearance and refuses to back his successor. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Millions of Zimbabweans who've lived for years under relentless poverty, corruption, and voter violence are deciding their future. Monday's election is being seen as a major test for the ruling Zanu PF party. Its leader, President Emmerson Mnangagwa, is the frontrunner. The former deputy of Robert Mugabe was fired weeks before the veteran leader was deposed last year, and they're more at odds now than ever before. Mnangagwa's main rival is Nelson Chamisa, leader of the Movement for Democratic Change. Both are promising a better future. We'll talk to our guests shortly, but first, Malcolm Webb reports from the town of Kwekwe.
Zimbabweans are voting in the first election in nearly 40 years that won't have former ruler Robert Mugabe on the ballot paper. He was pushed out by the military in November and his former right-hand man took over. He's Emmerson Mnangagwa, and he's the ruling Zanu PF's candidate in this election. Ever since he took over, he's been promising to revive the economy. Says he's getting pledges of billions of dollars of foreign investment from foreign investors who will return jobs in the economy, key issues. But here in the town of Kwekwe, he was a parliamentary candidate. He lost 2 elections here in the early 2000s and was only re-elected to parliament when he ran in a newly created rural constituency near here. And opposition say it's in the rural constituencies where it's easier to bribe and intimidate voters. He's going to be running against this man, Nelson Chamisa, who's leading the main opposition alliance. He's also been talking about the economy and jobs, and he says if the election is free and fair, he'll definitely be the one to win it. The opposition have already complained of irregularities. They say that there are problems with the ballot papers and that there's a lack of transparency with the whole of the voting system. The Electoral Commission denies it. The ruling party also denies that there's any untoward business going on. Malcolm Webb for Inside Story.
Former President Robert Mugabe gave a surprise speech on the eve of the elections. He criticized the government of his former right-hand man, President Emmerson Mnangagwa.
We have had, since November, an environment in our country which was far from being free, even politically, later on constitutional and legal.
All right, so let's take a closer look at what's happened since the war for independence from Britain when Rhodesia became Zimbabwe. Following the end of white minority rule in 1980, the Zanu PF won elections and party leader Robert Mugabe became prime minister. 7 years later, he changed the constitution to become president. But fast forward to the late 1990s, and the country once called the breadbasket of Africa is in economic crisis. Mugabe's campaign, launched in 2000 to seize land from white farmers and give it back to black families, provoked international condemnation. The EU imposed sanctions 2 years later. After Mugabe was re-elected, U.S. sanctions soon followed. And last year, Mugabe was deposed after 37 years in power, following mass protests, military intervention, and house arrest. All right, let's bring in our panel. Joining us in Harare, Nick Mangwana. He's the spokesman for the ruling Zanu PF party. Also in Zimbabwe, Obert Gutu, vice president of the MDCT and former spokesman for Morgan Tsvangirai. Welcome to you both. And now, Nick, I want to start with you. In this long and rambling press conference that former President Robert Mugabe gave, he said that he will not vote for his successor, Emmerson Mnangagwa. Why is he doing this now, and do you believe that it will have an impact on the vote?
There are 5.6 million voters in Zimbabwe, and with a few extra change at the end. Robert Mugabe is one of the 5.6 million people who are going to vote, hopefully, if they all turn up, who are going to vote tomorrow. So what he says or doesn't say is pretty much the same thing that anybody would say on the street to say they are going to vote for a candidate of their choice. He's free to choose a person of his own volition to vote for. It's not a big deal. It's an election where people choose a candidate of their choice. So Robert Mugabe is making a choice. No big deal.
But Nick, it does seem to be somewhat of a big deal because while he may not have explicitly endorsed Nelson Chamisa, he certainly was talking about what a good candidate he is. I mean, what does that say about the state of politics right now in Zimbabwe?
No, this says one thing. There is a person who has been in power for a long time, who was relevant to the discourse of Zimbabwe, who was relevant to the direction which the country was going, who was relevant to anything that moved in Zimbabwe. He has become irrelevant 8 months ago. He became irrelevant. And on the eve of election, where normally he would be on the ballot, he is absent from that ballot. Can he come to terms with that? No, he can't. So what does he do? He gets all of you guys' attention, the whole media, because he's an attention seeker. Now you're all attending to him. Now we're all talking about Robert Mugabe. We're not talking about the 5.6 million of people of Zimbabwe. We are going to make a choice in a very defining election tomorrow. This is what we have to talk about. But we all fell for his shenanigans and tricks. Now we're talking about him, the center of attention again, because he wanted to be the center of attention of any election. Now he's not. He can't live with it. So yes, we're talking of a 94-year-old man who has just found himself right now at the periphery of Zimbabwean politics. He doesn't like that. And in his usually manipulative style, we are all now gathered, and it's all Robert Mugabe and Robert Mugabe again. Robert Mugabe is not one of the 23 candidates tomorrow. These are the people we should be talking about. Robert Mugabe is yesterday's news.
Obert, I saw you nodding your head along to what Nick was saying there. Do you have a response? Do you have a response to what he was saying?
Look, I'm largely in agreement with what Nick was saying about Robert Mugabe. Look, some of us are on record saying Robert Mugabe at 94 is yesterday's man. So, quite honestly, for anyone to think that they will get political traction from getting endorsement, be it direct or indirect, from Robert Mugabe to us in the MDCT, led by Honorable Dr. Thokozani Kupe, it is tantamount to the kiss of death. Robert Mugabe is largely responsible for the mess that is Zimbabwe today. He was a man who was in power for close to 4 decades, ran the country through iron-fisted dictatorial and fascist rule. He should actually be the last man to complain about lack of constitutionalism, lack of democracy. So when I heard him talk about constitutionalism, I almost burst out laughing. And I said, oh my God, what is he talking about? Look, he's no longer affecting Zimbabwean politics. When he was taken out of power in November last year, there were scenes of jubilation. There were scenes of jubilation in Zimbabwe. Mugabe is yesterday's man.
Okay, Nick, look, let me ask you this. The fact that Robert Mugabe comes out and says this today, is this evidence that the feuds, that the fractures that have been apparent for a while in Zanu PF, that they are still ongoing?
No, it's not at all. There were factions in Zanu PF. Robert Mugabe was running the party and the country with a cabal of factionalists, which we coined the G40 crew. The G40 was expelled from Zanu PF. They formed their own party called the National Patriotic Front. National Patriotic Front, yeah, NPF. Now, which has gone ahead and split into 2 factions on its own. This is Robert Mugabe's party. This is Robert Mugabe's project. That project, now that Robert Mugabe is seen that that project was stillborn, he has decided again to try to steer things in Zanu PF. Robert Mugabe is out of Zanu PF by merely the fact that he formed another political entity to contest against Zanu PF. So what Robert Mugabe says is almost the same thing that an opposition politician would say against Zanu PF. It's inconsequential. Zanu PF has lost leadership in the past, including Dawaning Stole, the founding president, and Zanu PF has gone on. What Robert Mugabe does not understand is that Zanu PF is an institution. He thought he was the embodiment of Zanu PF. He is not. He cannot process that. He cannot live with that for the last few days, for the last period he is left with on this earth. It's something that he cannot fathom. But unfortunately for him, this is something that has happened. Zanu PF held an extraordinary Congress without Robert Mugabe. Zanu PF chose and endorsed its current presidential candidate, Emmerson Mnangagwa, without Robert Mugabe. At that point, when we chose Robert Mugabe, when we chose Emmerson Mnangagwa, I mean to say, Robert Mugabe was not there. Robert Mugabe's opinion did not matter. So why does he think his opinion matters now? When we went for nomination courts, and President Mnangagwa had the nomination to be on the ballot, Robert Mugabe's opinion did not matter. Robert Mugabe's petition did not matter. Why does he think it matters now? It doesn't. He's irrelevant. So we are not bothered at all. If there is anything that deserves to be called a damn squib, that's Robert Mugabe's freak show today with the press. Because that's what it was. It's a freak show where an old man decides to get to be, a very old man for that matter, decides to be at the center of attention, decides to take the whole world's attention from a very defining election. It's sad, but you know what? We are Africans, and as Africans, we do have a lot of respect for elderly people, even those that have lost their minds. We do still hold them in high esteem just because of the maturity of their age. And because of that, understanding that our former president is now of a certain age where people do lose their minds once in a while, do drift in and out, we accredit him to that. We accredit his statements to that. So we are not worried. We are not bothered.
All right, I want to bring in another guest that's just joined our panel from London. Joseph Ochieno is a writer and commentator on African affairs in the New African magazine. Joseph, I want to ask you, look, Emmerson Mnangagwa was Robert Mugabe's right-hand man for decades. So how can voters now trust his word that his rule will be different?
I think that that's perhaps an element of a contradiction for the people of Zimbabwe. But I've just had Nick make his observations there. I think where Mnangagwa actually wins is the fact that Zanu PF was a political party and is a political party, and it was a political organization and liberation movement that included Mnangagwa, Mugabe, and many other people, including Nick, and it was massively supported across the continent. The challenges they had over the last 20 years notwithstanding. But I just simply want to say that I don't really think this election is about Mnangagwa per se. I think the process over the last several months has taken place and the evidence is there on the ground. Part of the conversation that I joined you guys on, I think what's much more important is the fact that actually the opposition in Nelson Chamisa happens to be now backed by Robert Mugabe. And I think probably, other than whether or not Mugabe wins in this process, I think whether or not necessarily the key opposition organization, meaning MDC, that should really be challenging for position this time round, necessarily benefits from this process.
Obert, do you believe that Mnangagwa is the front runner here? We've seen polls in the past several days which seem to indicate that the race is much closer than people thought it was before. Do you think Mnangagwa, that he will prevail here, or do you think Nelson Chamisa has a real chance?
It's difficult to tell at this stage because really I'm here speaking on behalf of my party, the MDCT led by Thokozani Kupe, and I'm quite confident that we are the party that is actually going to shock the world, coming up with a very significant showing, particularly on the presidential vote, because Thokozani Kupe herself is a founder member of the Movement for Democratic Change. She has been the late Dr. Morgan Richard Tsvangarai's deputy for a period in excess of a dozen years, a firebrand politician in her own right. And you'd actually want to believe that as you ask Zimbabweans, their opinion on the ground, they will actually be telling you that we are going to vote for a candidate who has been consistent, particularly when it comes to democratic credentials, a candidate who has not been tainted with any allegations of corruption, a candidate who actually has had an exemplary political career, and that's none other than Thokozani Kupe. So don't be shocked when she scores an astounding margin in the presidential election. So at the end of the day, I don't want to believe that there's any obvious front runner. I believe that Thokozani Kupe and the MDCT, at the end of the day, are actually going to be the game changer. We are actually going to be able to decide who becomes the next president of Zimbabwe, believe you me. Because when you look at it, when you come to Zimbabwe, you talk to ordinary people in the villages, in the townships, on the streets, you'll be shocked at the level of support that the MDCT led by Kupe has. So, hey, hang on, Zimbabweans, hang on, the world. We are going to punch above our weight.
Joseph, clearly there are divisions. There is some chaos and disarray within the MDC. If we can envision a scenario by which Nelson Chamisa would prevail in the election, what happens then? If the party is as disorganized as it may be after the death of Morgan Tsvangirai, what happens for Nelson Chamisa if he were to prevail?
I think in the unlikely event, of course, that he did, then we would be having this conversation. But I think what the other guest has just suggested and just linked to your question tells you that that unfortunately makes it slightly much more unlikely for the opposition. The earlier question, I thought it was for me. The advantage that the incumbent actually has is not only is he partly rounded and seen to be the guy who dared take on Mugabe. So therefore, they are very likely bound to be people both in rural Zimbabwe and urban Zimbabwe who are likely to give him the benefit of the doubt. But beyond that, I think the Chamisas and others, and I don't know what happened in much, except for the more recent, perhaps 1 month, sort of avoided or did not make the best use of the traditional rural base, which basically is traditionally enjoyed by Zanu PF. And although Zanu PF got very bad press generally over the years, it is a political party. And I think, by and large, the people of Zimbabwe are substantially ideological. And if Zanu PF is to gather around issues that Zanu PF as a political ideology represents, it's unlikely that probably that anybody else but Mnangagwa would win, regardless of all the issues and challenges that may be presented by one or two by the other guest of ours.
Nick, Emmerson Mnangagwa keeps claiming that Zimbabwe is open for business. But what steps have we seen him take up until this point to boost the economy? And what steps can we expect him to take if he is elected?
What President Mnangagwa will do is now to roll out the programs that will bring further investment into Zimbabwe. We expect a roadmap for stabilization of the current of the current situation in Zimbabwe, because obviously everybody knows that Zimbabwe is going through a lot of liquidity problems. Now, the programs that he started, the employment, the 86,000 people that have been employed in 6 weeks, is just a snippet of what he can deliver in 5 years. What he has done is to make sure that when investment comes, it comes with technology. It comes with skills transfer to the local people. And the local people, the local business, as it cascades down, they will become also skilled up. They will become empowered in terms of capitalization to take the country forward. So it's not just about the foreign business that is attracting to Zimbabwe, but he's doing that in order to have that counter-transference between the foreign investor and the local businessman. Now, doing that, this is what I thought we should be talking about, not that Nelson Chamisa has just been given a kiss of death by Robert Mugabe, because that's exactly what has happened.
That is what it is.
We are reforming Zimbabwe. Nelson Chamisa is talking about change. He's talking about change. What is he changing? He wants to change what Robert Mugabe did. And Emmerson Mnangagwa is talking about change. President Mnangagwa is talking about change. What is he transforming right now? He's transforming the ills that Robert Mugabe did. The ills that he probably wanted Robert Mugabe not to do when he was in his government, but he has now been given an opportunity to change those. So whenever we're talking of change, we are saying what went wrong and who drove it to go wrong. What went wrong was what Robert Mugabe made it to be. So we're not talking of a new era. We're talking of an era without Robert Mugabe.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're starting to run out of time. I want to get to Obert. I want to ask him a question as well. Obert, despite all the campaign promises from the candidates, practically speaking, how hard is it going to be to actually try to revive the economy? We're talking about a country that has one of the highest rates of unemployment in the world. What steps are going to need to be taken immediately?
No, it's going to be very difficult because in Zimbabwe, everything that can go wrong has since gone wrong. This will take a lot of work. We really have to roll up our sleeves and get on to work to make this country reboot the economy, to make this country work again. I mean, when you look at the infrastructural dilapidation, when you look at the rail facilities, when you look at everything that can go wrong has since gone wrong. And when I hear some presidential candidates saying that they are going to fix these things in 2 weeks, I just say to myself, this is a joke in bad taste. Zimbabwe will need a lot of work, a lot of time. I'm unable to give a timeline, but quite honestly, it's not going to take anything less than 5 years to fix this country, to reboot the economy, to just make sure that we start having industries opening again, make sure that our roads are rehabilitated, the railway infrastructure is rehabilitated, we've got clean and safe water in our homes. Because like I said, everything that can go wrong has since gone wrong. It's not going to be a walk in the park. And anyone who is promising people that they are going to do this overnight is obviously lying through their teeth. And that should not be taken seriously. It's actually, like I've said earlier, a big joke in very bad taste.
Joseph, it is significant, of course, that there are election observers on the ground in Zimbabwe. Do you believe, though, that even though they are there, that these elections will be credible, that they will be fair and free?
I think by and large, up to this stage, there's no reason why we shouldn't believe that. And in fact, I must say that going forward for Zimbabwe, in the event that election results came out and whatever candidate actually won these elections, almost seemingly going to be Emmerson Mnangagwa, all that by and large is, if we don't see the kind of violence that we used to see in the streets of Zimbabwe, confidence is going to return, and it's only confidence that Zimbabwe needs. Already, there have been reports of a major boost in the production of tobacco, a revival of the agricultural sector. The number of Africans who got farms and opportunity to go ahead and farm has actually substantially gone on the up. I think by and large, Zimbabwe should be able to, yes, it's not going to be 2 weeks, but it won't take a very long time for this country because it's a very able country, substantially gifted by a series of resources, both human and natural. But really, perception is the most important thing in politics. The election must be seen to have gone up through credibly, and really, if the candidates for the next few hours are able to talk real issues and to show that they're able to give hope to the vast majority of the Zimbabwean people, by and large, there is no reason why perhaps in a year from today, we wouldn't be having a better conversation than what we're having today.
Okay, Joseph, you're talking about hope. You're talking about change. In the past, of course, elections have been marred there by violence and intimidation. From your vantage point, how has it gone so far this time?
And as I said, by and large, very well. Election observers have come in, but also at the same time, foreign media that actually, in part, fueled this process have actually decided to give Zimbabweans a chance. Remember that this election is taking place without Robert Mugabe, and like we said before, the issue in Zimbabwe, in a way, over the years had to do with Robert Mugabe and an element of whatever was happening down there. But by and large, Zimbabwe was basically in a country at war with itself, but also at war with the external forces for the obvious reason that we don't want to repeat here. Part of it, obviously, is land reform. And I think Mnangagwa has actually taken it on. How he's able to strike a balance without necessarily reversing or pushing it back is going to be part of the challenge, partly for him and whoever else in this case becomes the next president. I suspect that very likely is going to be Mnangagwa.
And Joseph, very quickly, I'm going to give you the last word here. Just about 30 seconds we have. Okay, if these elections are deemed credible, do you think that we will start seeing possible lifting of sanctions, more investment in Zimbabwe?
I think that's the important point, and I think it may be a question to our friends in the West. I think the guys in the East, meaning Chinese and Indians, will come in regardless of whatever else happens. But in as long as it's actually deemed credible, there is substantial opportunity in Zimbabwe. If Washington and London don't pull up their socks and the EU, I think the Chinese will. just like the Chinese, actually tried their level best to have managed to make sure that Zimbabwe did not completely sink. There's a huge amount of opportunities in this country. Let this process go through over the next 24 hours, freely, by and large, credibly, and let there be no violence, and let the losers genuinely go ahead and put up their hands and simply say, we've lost, and we'll try another, give it another chance.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thanks to all our guests, Nick Mangwana, Joseph Ochieno, and Obert Gutu. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.